Ah yes, Masters of the Universe, one of the most iconic 80s cheese fests that helped sell a whole lot of toys and probably was a significant factor in me developing an interest in swords and fantasy as a kid. The sword, of course, the Sword of Power, He-Man's sword, is also one of the most iconic things that fantasy has ever produced. We'll look at some sword designs. So, which of them is worst and which is best? How do you even evaluate that? I mean, it's all fantasy, right? And He-Man is one of the most overpowered Mary Sue characters ever created. I mean, the dude can lift up a mountain and throw it. He can do whatever the hell he wants. He has an absurd amount of strength. So it doesn't really matter what he swings, right? He can grab just about anything and beat somebody to a pulp with it. So you can go crazy with the design, right? So how am I going to determine what's worst and what's better? Well, I'm just going to go by aesthetics, which is subjective, obviously, and, shall we say, internal logic. You'll see what I mean a bit later. But let's just start. So, the worst of the bunch that I could find of original designs is the 2002 version. Can you say over-designed? This should be an example in the dictionary under over-designed. It's a mess. It's a hilarious mess. I mean, just look at how much stuff is going on. It's like a cybernetic crab version of the Sword of Power. It's got so many different pieces for absolutely no reason other than it's so cool. I don't even know what's going on here. It's got some random lines. It's got random extra pieces glued on top. It's got, it said like the crab claws or whatever. You can't even distinguish the logo here, whatever the hell. It's got so much going on. It is visually cluttered and confusing and meant to break right here, where it's super skinny and this is all massively wide paddle shaped. Well, that was the 90s for you. I mean, He-Man has always been roided out, but at least his bodybuilder physique used to be attainable. Very difficult, but like a Schwarzenegger physique. No, we can't have that. We gotta have like excessively inhumanly broad and weirdly angular shoulders, and then like a super skinny waist. I don't know where his organs went. Super cornery knees. I mean, this is quintessentially late 90s, early 2000s. Everything is gritty and dirty and overloaded with detail and exaggerated to hell and back. And then of course the sword had to match the aesthetic. So yeah, completely packed with meaningless features. It's got like, I don't know, some circuitry going on here for no apparent reason. So it just vaguely insinuates the idea of, oh yeah, tech. This is like some kind of techie. The original was just magic. No, it's space magic, basically. AKA tech that doesn't make any frickin' sense. I mean, I can buy that he's able to swing this monstrosity around. That would probably weigh 30 kilograms in real life, but he's He-Man. Okay, fine, whatever. He can do way more. But it's hideous. It's an affront to the eyes. It makes you want to reach for a bottle of bleach to cleanse your tormented eyeballs, but unfortunately, they have already been defiled to the point where you're blinded and can't even find the bleach. Yeah, let's move on, shall we? Next up, the design from DC Universe versus Masters of the Universe, which is an amazing crossover, by the way. Like, if you don't get excited for this, then your inner kid is dead, and you need to retire right now into the grave. It's cool. It's a very cool idea, but what on earth were they thinking? So he's gonna fight creepy, possessed Superman with this thing, which again, design-wise, is pretty hard on the eyes. I mean, first off, the blade. The blade is not over-designed, it's actually under-designed, because it's literally just straight lines, hard corners here, tapers to a point, the worst secondary bevel you've ever seen. Otherwise, it's just flat and unappealing to look at. Where they went over-design is with the guard, and unfortunately, this is where it becomes silly, even within the logic of the universe. I don't care how strong you are, how magically enhanced and OP and whatever. I don't care. This is awkward. If the guard on both sides comes down like this and even ends in like a pointy corner, you're not going to have fun with this. Straight up. This is going to get in the way. You have to grip this lower to avoid this. And even then, you're going to hate this. Straight up. It's impractical to the highest degree. And magic is not going to fix that. Unless it's the kind of magic that turns you into a 3D model where this part doesn't have collision detection and it just clips straight through your hand and your wrist and forearm. Then you're good. Then you're not going to mind. Otherwise, oof. Then we've got the 1987 live-action movie, which traumatized me as a kid. So, this could have been good, I suppose. Dolph Lundgren was a great cast. He definitely represented He-Man quite well in terms of looks and build and everything. Like, this could have worked if they hadn't insisted on trying to be Star Wars. I mean, seriously, this movie poster screams, I want to be Star Wars, but I don't have the budget. Speaking of budget, I'm assuming that's what led to the horrible decision of making it take place mostly on Earth. Why? Why would you do this? It's... The whole appeal was fantasy. It takes place on a different world. Where's Eternia? No. They're just going to go to Earth. Yeah. Boring-ass, mundane Earth. The sword design was maybe not as underwhelming as the movie, but still very underwhelming. So pretty simple blade. Not much to say here. It's not quite as bad as the one from the DC Universe, Masters of the Universe crossover. But then I have no idea what they were thinking with this. Like, this looks nothing like the original design and is not a good evolution or anything. It's just like, make it vaguely flowery by curling up the ends of this bronze guard. Yeah. I mean, there's one thing to be said about it. The handle is wrapped. The original's not. Okay. But the problem is, if I told you this out of context, would you guess that this is Masters of the Universe? No, you wouldn't. You would just think this is just some random 80s movie wall hanger. You know, it has the same vibe as all the others. It's like, whatever. It could be from Conan, it could be from Krull or Highlander or whatever. It's so generic. I can't criticize it too much in practical terms. I mean, yeah, if you made this in real life, it would be a clunker. It would be horrible compared to anything even vaguely historical. But it's He-Man. Like, okay, he can handle it, whatever. Another case of what were they thinking? The new adventures of He-Man that nobody asked for. The sword could have been fine. Could have been totally fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the blade. You know, this is like a historical side sword blade, perhaps, something like that. You know, pretty slender blade. There's really not a whole lot you can say that there's nothing wrong with it. Neither aesthetically nor functionally. But then they decided to go with this Kingdom Hearts Keyblade guard. I've never understood what the point is here. Like, Even back then, as a kid, I was confused. What is this? Because it's wrapped. It looks like it's supposed to be a second grip, but what do you do with it? Because, like, if you try to hold on to this, you have the same problem as with the Keyblade. You can't really wield this effectively without breaking a wrist. If you had it just on one side, okay, then this could be used as a knuckle guard for two-handed use. You know, the main hand goes here, the offhand goes there, and then, yeah, okay, you've got a knuckle guard there now. Fine. It would look pretty weird then, so they probably just went with it to make it symmetrical, to make it more appealing visually. Did that work? Well, that's a matter of opinion. As it is, you could really only hold it with the flat facing forward, which, well, I mean, there are some techniques you can use that way, but it would seriously limit how much you can use the sword. And then you have the guards on either side, where they're not going to do too much. You can block an opponent's weapon, you know, trying to catch it on here, but if it goes there, it may very well slide off and go onto your arm. So, yeah, practically not the most fantastic thing in the world, but you can mostly just kind of ignore it. I can see where they're going with this because it relates to the original design. You could just ignore that, but they really drew attention to it. The toy design as well. It's even worse, in fact, because with the toy design, it looks like, okay, we've got an energy blade, an energy handle. Can he even hold on to that without burning himself or otherwise being damaged? Like, why? Why did they design the handle the same way as the blade and then make this all wrapped and proper handle looking? It's no longer the Sword of Power, it's a Sword of Confusion now. Sure, not all versions did that. This one here is wrapped handle all the way. So, okay. Like, you could hold on to this without injuring yourself, and it's not too ugly. To be fair, this illustration is actually pretty cool. Like, this, it makes it work. You know, like, aesthetically, the proportions are quite good. Nothing is, like, weirdly overly clunky or too thick or misshapen or whatever. This actually works. And in practical terms, it would be easy enough to fix it by just chopping off one of those two. So, like, yeah, it's a pass. It's pretty good overall, with just one exception. It does depend a lot on the quality of the individual illustration. I mean, what even is this? He's using a piece of stone wall as a shield, apparently, or a sarcophagus lid or something, and then oh boy. And now we've arrived at the OG Sword of Power. I wasn't quite sure whether to rank this higher than the New Adventures one, because arguably the one from the New Adventures is actually more practical, more usable, or at least it's better balanced. Let's put it that way. This has got a whole lot of mass in the hilt here, which is a little bit excessive. And the other one has a little bit more visual contrast, because this is just one piece. This is just one gray piece of metal all throughout. It doesn't even have a wrap there, nothing. You just hold on to the plain piece of steel at the end. So that's not terribly appealing, but it's for obvious reasons. It's the toy. It was just a simple piece of gray plastic, and the show was designed to sell the toys, so yeah, they just went with that. And when you look at this in particular, there's a solid argument to be made for it to not be solid, because this is just excess plastic. It's just an artifact of the molding process. This looks like you're supposed to cut it yourself, you know? It looks like this is supposed to be open, which would make a lot more sense, because then you have sort of a sigh effect. You could potentially trap an enemy blade in here. So considering that it was based on a plastic toy, and considering that at the time basically nobody had any clue about swords, even historians, to a large extent, were confused about the practical aspects of swords, let's say, and there wasn't that much research into historical sword fighting yet, not that I'm aware. So yeah, considering that nobody really knew what a sword is supposed to be like to be functional, how to design it and all that, and not like they cared either, considering all that, this is not too bad, actually. Good profile taper here, and yeah, the stuff looks weird in most versions, but at least it has something to distinguish itself from other swords. There's a reason it's still iconic. It's unique. Like, not everything is unique is good, but at least it's recognizable. And there is quite a bit of variation too. This one here looks a lot different. It's way shorter for some reason, and the openings here are more defined. Again, there's really no reason to make the quillons touch the rest of it and have it be a solid piece other than it's easier to cast that way. Real life reproductions also give you the impression that, yeah, it would be pretty clunky. There's definitely more metal than you need, and you kind of need, maybe not superhuman strength, but a lot of excess strength to wield this effectively. But again, that's not the problem because it's HEMA. And yeah, it's got an eye-catching profile. Depending on the drawing, this could very well be bottom tier because, I mean, look at this gray spray-painted cardboard cutout. And then Skeletor's is even worse. This is hilariously terrible. Like, I think most kids back then could draw it better than this. So, oof. This, on the other hand, looks surprisingly good. That's perfectly functional, as it is. The proportions are quite a bit better here. And, you know, again, this guard is basically not an actual guard. This is really more ornamental. It's not going to do a whole lot. Now, he often uses a shield, so it doesn't matter, right? What does he need hand protection for if he uses a shield? As if he knew how to use a shield effectively to really cover his sword hand. But assuming he could, yeah, sure. Together with a shield, this makes sense. I'd much rather bend those quillons down so it actually provides some protection. But hey, if you want aesthetics over functionality, then okay, fine, whatever. That's a better version. It still looks like it's all made of one piece of metal and doesn't even have a wrapped handle, and the handle, as usual, is probably round, which sucks. But at least you now have some space here. So it would be pretty difficult to catch an opponent's blade, but at least it's possible. There's some protection to be had here. So, all right, it looks better visually, in my opinion. And that's also what they went for in Revelation. Whatever you think about the show, it stuck surprisingly closely to the original designs, to the point where you can almost see the molding lines on the plastic toys. But they did improve the design of the sword. So they open up the guard here, which, as said, if you look at the original toy, that seems to be the way it's intended, or at least it can easily be interpreted that way. And they open it up some more. Then they counteracted it somewhat by making the ricasso wider here. But that's, you can clearly tell that's an aesthetic choice rather than a practical choice. Because, like, nowadays, who has any clue about sword fighting still in practical terms, other than a few nerds who do HEMA or look into it for whatever reason? Functionally, again, definitely the sword from New Adventures of He-Man, much more usable. This looks like one hell of a clunker, but again, it's He-Man. In fact, you can very much argue that it needs to be this weirdly clunky and thick to even survive the sort of forces that he would transfer with it. I mean, if you swing a sword or a sword-like object with superhuman strength, a regular sword would just shatter or bend or explode. So, yeah, you could very well argue that if it's made of steel or similar material, then it has to be extra thick and stout. This one's magical and basically indestructible due to its magic, so no, it's not needed at all. And the toy looks surprisingly good. I mean, I don't know what's going on with this derpy expression, but the sword, I would say, actually looks better than in the show. So yeah, you know what? This is quite good. I can get behind this for the most part. Here's a real-life replica, which looks better than I would have expected. That's actually pretty decent. Again, that's a lot of unnecessary extra mass, so this wouldn't handle fantastically. But aesthetically, it came out quite nicely. And yeah, they turned this into really more of a longsword. I mean, hand and a half sword. In the show, it's clearly supposed to be a hand and a half sword because he does swing it with two hands sometimes, but it can also be held in one hand. Depends on the shot. The handle length seems to grow and shrink a little bit. That's a typical artifact of animation. By far the best interpretation of the Sword of Power that I've seen is made by Fable Blades, the King of Castle Grayskull. This one is fantastic. So the handle was lengthened, so now that it's really a dedicated two-handed longsword rather than a hand and a half. Not something you'd easily wield in one hand together with a shield. Even if you're particularly strong, the length would just be a little bit cumbersome compared to the hand and a half version. But for two-handed use, this makes perfect sense. The way the guard is designed is still recognizable, but a lot more practical. So now you have something that is not overly thick, that's perfectly well-shaped, that, in fact, you could have potentially seen on a sword in history. And the blade also flares to stick to the original iconic shape, but there's more space there. So you have a better chance of actually using this defensively. And it also doesn't add a whole lot of weight. You know, it does shift the balance back a little bit, which is not really a bad thing. In fact, the balance is pretty similar to a lot of swords that I've tested in reviews. The weight is fine too, 1.88 kilograms, which is on the upper end of historical longswords, perfectly usable. So this is really the right compromise between style, aesthetics, and functionality. Oh look, it even has a handle wrap made of kid leather. So part of your childhood is always with you. There you have it. That's the way to go. So by far the best design, in my opinion. And yeah, that's all the ones I've seen. Let us know what you think in the comments. Hope you found this entertaining. Thanks for watching, and have a good one, folks.